Sable Lomax. My pronouns are she and her. I am very, very excited for today's episode of the Fearless Futures Podcast, Season 2, Episode 11, The Nonlinear Road to Equity, because I get to talk to you, Jeremiah. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Doing better now that I'm talking to you, Sable.
My day is not over, but I'm pretty sure this will be the highlight of the day. And I know I'm a few hours ahead, so I can say that with confidence. Like that is the truth.
Nice.
So, out of all of the guests that we have had, Jeremiah, I think you're one of the few I've actually physically met in person. Doing this podcast was the first time I received your full bio. And I said, well, I knew you were amazing and you do amazing things, but it's something about reading it. I said, oh, we will not shorten this. How do you feel when you get your bio read? Do you like it? Do you dislike it? Which side of the spectrum are you on? Are you in the middle?
I am probably more on the discomfort side,
That is me.
especially the long version. Especially the long version.
Well, I don't know what version I have here, but here we go, folks.
I hope it's the shorter version.
It's a it's a good one, I promise. Jeremiah Chan, pronouns he and him, is the head of patents, licensing, and open source at Meta. He and his team are responsible for the development of Meta's worldwide patent portfolio, intellectual property transactions, open source software, IP risk mitigation initiatives, as well as industry-wide efforts to promote gender diversity, equity, and inclusion in innovation and the IP profession. Jeremiah is also a member of the USPTO's Patent Public Advisory Committee, where he has led subcommittees for legislation and policy, artificial intelligence, and innovation expansion. Prior to joining Meta, Jeremiah led an international team at Google that was focused on portfolio strategy, operations, and data science. And before Google, Jeremiah served as head of IP for JDSU. He started his career in private practice with the law firm Fish and Neve, where he specialized in litigation, opinion work, and client counseling. A graduate of UC Berkeley with, I might add, highest honors while working as a marketing assistant at the University of California Press. Received his JD from Cornell Law School, I know you recalled, and worked as a law intern at Cornell's Legal Aid Clinic. Jeremiah serves as an advisory board member for the High Tech Law Institute at Santa Clara University School of Law and as chairman of the board for the Bay Area Anti-Trafficking Coalition, a nonprofit organization that combats human trafficking. Jeremiah, I don't know if that was the long version of the short version, but my first question to you is, are you eating and sleeping as much as you need to as a human being, given all that you do?
I am eating too much these days. I need to stop eating, actually, and I need to exercise more.
So every guest that we've had thus far, we've asked them this question. I'm sure I paraphrase it in different ways. But essentially, and it's kind of an unfair question, but if you had to choose a mic drop equity moment, learning, if you will, from the past, what would that moment be for you? So some people have had two moments, but if you had to like pick one that stood out to you or stands out to you, at least in this moment, what would that be?
Yeah, it's a great question, Sable. I would say I have had a few, but
Hmm.
there is a common theme to all of them, which is it's actually a person, and that person is your CEO and founder of Fearless Futures, Hannah Nema McCluskey, who created this great organization, Fearless Futures. I actually did not know about them until I joined Meta back in 2018. And as you know, some folks may not know, Meta has engaged Fearless Futures to do a lot of education around diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I had the good fortune of enrolling in a pilot at the time, a pilot class in 2019, where they were kind of just testing out and experimenting with this new type of class that incorporated this other problem solving framework that I am obsessed with called design thinking. And the class was called Design for Inclusion. And rather than sending one of Fearless Futures talented instructors out to teach this class, we actually got the founder. You sent Hannah to come to Fremont, California. I had Hannah for a good week with a cohort of leaders throughout the company. And in the course of that week, several mic drop moments that for me opened my eyes to systems of oppression, like understanding my own lived experience with racism and discrimination, but not really seeing or understanding the systems. So Hannah kind of gave me a dose of reality and education there. And I think for many people who are tuned in, unlike not unlike me, we don't really have this kind of education growing up in the classrooms. This is something that I know I would love to see more of in, elementary and high school and even college, but a lot more education around these issues. But, for me, not having them, I kind of just ate up what Hannah was teaching us. And in the course of that week, a few different mic drop moments where I kind of finally could see the systems of oppression at play. That mic drop moment, I often analogize it to like, Keanu Reeves and Morpheus. Do you want the red pill or the blue pill? I feel like I've been eating, virtual filet mignon for a long time and thinking it's real, and it's actually not real. It's just code. Um, so Hannah gave me the red pill and kind of opened my eyes to systems of oppression. I think she made me realize for the first time that I am in a position of privilege and power, and that kind of gives me a superpower to bring change to the system. Whereas I never saw myself as a person who had a lot of privilege or power or voice. And she kind of pointed that out. And as a result of that, gave me another mic drop moment to say, with that privilege and power, you need to do something. And the last response I'll give you, Sable, was there was a particular moment during our class, pretty early on, where Hannah facilitated this game with a bunch of balls.
That's my
And we would
favorite.
break out. I had never, so some people on the call may have played this before as part of leadership exercises or team building exercises, but I had never played this before. We broke out into small groups, and to give you the flavor, we each got a card with a particular job that we were supposed to do. So we had a set of balls, and it's almost like our little small group. We were like a little company manufacturing these balls, and we had to do certain things with them and pass them around and et cetera. You get the idea. So we started doing this, and in the course of this exercise, one person in our circle just started being super obnoxious and picking on one of the people in our circle, throwing balls at them, disrupting their job. They couldn't work. They couldn't do their job. And meanwhile, I wasn't being bothered. I was doing my job, but I felt bad for this colleague of mine who was in the circle, who after a little while, like in the beginning, it was all fun and games. Like we're all laughing. But after like 5, 10, 15 minutes of having a ball thrown in your face, they were pretty irritated and annoyed, understandably so. And I remember feeling like, what is going on? Like, what's the point of this? It doesn't feel good. And like, can we just stop this? But we went on and we tried to do our jobs. And the interesting thing about it was when we debriefed about the exercise afterward, spoiler alert here, um, the whole idea was that we each had a job, and this person, disrupting this other person's job and being like super annoying, that was actually their job. And one of the questions that really stuck with me that I think was another aha moment was, I think at one point Hannah said, why didn't someone like stop it? Like, why didn't someone say, like, this is not cool? Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you do anything? Nobody in my circle did that. Like, no one in my circle who wasn't being bothered said anything, even though we all felt like it was not right. It wasn't fair. Someone was not being treated fairly. Someone was actually being treated pretty badly. And that was definitely a light switch, right? Like, what am I doing and how am I being complicit to the systems of oppression at play? So I give all the credit to Hannah. She had a bunch of different microphone drop moments for me. And they all point to her as the common theme here to say, hey, you need to wake up.
Thank you for that. Even bringing in the word complicit and tying that to, if you're only focused on your role and what you're supposed to be doing, but you're very aware of what's happening and how what's happening might not be right, but yet you don't do anything about it, whether that's saying something, speaking up, engaging, inserting yourself in some way, shape, or form, how that impacts overall dynamics, but also how it does make you complicit in the harm that is taking place. We come to this work from different places for different reasons. I have my reasons, as I like to, my Instagram profile says Black girl born in Brooklyn. My family migrated from the South during the Great Migration era that took place in the States. There's still family that lived in the South, never left. So we come to it from different reasons. The quality of life that they might have expected when they got to Brooklyn that did not receive on both father's side and New York side, my mother's side, because there's the assumption that the North is so progressive and that the South is the complete opposite, as if it's still not racism and classism and discrimination taking place, just manifesting slightly differently. Like we come to this work for different reasons. Jeremiah, if you had to pinpoint, and this is another unfair question, if you will, how you came to this work to be as committed as you are now, what would you say your reasons have been in the past or are to this day?
I think, I mean, some of what you just shared, Sable, resonate with me in terms of my own lived experience. And I'd be lying if I didn't say that had a role to play in why I do what I do. But I think it's one part of it. And so briefly on that note, like for me, having grown up in, a rural part of Illinois, as an early kid and being the only, Asian family within, I don't know, a 50-mile radius. My family and I grew up, and my brothers and I grew up with a lot of looks. Like we have never seen anyone who looked like you before. And that came with a lot of racism and discrimination, that was just part of our daily lives. Some of it was very explicit. Others, other instances and examples were more, um, uh, things and experiences I didn't actually realize until many years later. And there are now experiences that have come up, as I've listened to other people's stories and shared my own, that like I didn't even realize. So just a couple of quick examples. I remember, right, growing up as a small kid in farm town Illinois. Um, One of the weekend things that my brothers and I would do was often we'd jump on our bikes and just ride around town everywhere. And I remember, every weekend or many weekends, as we'd be jumping on our bikes and leaving the house, I remember my mom would take out the hose and she'd be washing the aluminum siding on the side of our house. And I honestly thought that was like a normal chore people did, until many years later, having a conversation with my mom, who finally told me that these were the reason why she was washing the side of our house was that neighbors would throw dog poop on the house as a message to like get out of the neighborhood. Never had any idea. And I think part of it was probably my parents shielding me from that ugly reality that they were dealing with and taking the burden on,
Mm-hmm.
um, and me not seeing. So some of it was explicit, some of it was very like I didn't even realize what was happening at the time. And now in hindsight, understanding more what that experience is. I think that lived experience with the education that people like Hannah have given me have really kind of turned it into a realization that I'm not the only one, or just there are just a few people in a particular area of the country or neighborhood. They're the only ones who experience this. No, like you start when you are able to see the systems, it's almost like seeing the matrix. You start to realize there's so many people groups from marginalized communities that are all experiencing different forms of the oppression. And so for me, that was definitely an eye opener to say, we need to do something here. Like this can't be happening. Like the experiences I've had and the marginalization, it's happening to so many people and it's so rooted in the institutions, policies, and laws of our country. We got to examine all of this, and we really do need to do what we can to make change. And these are some of the ideas I've shared before around like, Hannah instilling in me that as people with privilege and power, you have an ability to bring change. And so that's been part of it. I think the other part of it is I've been really lucky to be not only surrounded by amazing mentors and authors and other people I've followed. So, Hannah's one of them. Michelle Silverthorne is another person that I met and has continued to inspire me. Brian Stevenson with the Equal Justice Initiative is one of my personal heroes. If he ever listens to this, I would love to meet you and talk to you and pick your brain. But I feel like I've had so many, sources of
Mm-hmm.
knowledge and wisdom around these issues. And then even on my own team, Sable,
Yeah.
as we have focused on building a diverse team, I have remarkable people on my team that inspire me every day. Just a quick note about one gentleman, because today is very apropos. We're having a graduation ceremony for a program that my team and I rolled out last year called the Patent Pipeline Program.
I
In
remember
my
you telling
profession,
me about this program. Yeah.
in my profession, there is severe underrepresentation of women and minorities in what we call the patent profession. So drafting patent applications and sending them through the patent office and getting granted, patent rights for innovators. And there's just drastic underrepresentation. There's a guy on my team, Braxton Davis, who almost a little over a decade ago, this is like right out of law school, he saw this problem and on his own decided to create a nonprofit organization called NCPP that would give free patent prosecution training to people of color and women who have technical backgrounds and can learn how to do this and become employable and have this ability and these skills. And they would give that out for free and provide that training. He came to Meta last year and agreed to join our team. And one of the first conversations we had was, how can we brainstorm taking this program to the next level? And out of that was born the Patent Pipeline program, where we take these talented and diverse individuals that are trained through NCPP and we connect them with our network of top tier law firms throughout the country that are doing work for Meta who are looking for diverse candidates to build their diverse teams and workforces within their law firms. For years, I've been hearing from these law firm partners, we just can't find these diverse candidates. They don't
Yeah,
exist.
they
And
exist.
so with the patent,
Yeah.
they do they do exist. And with the patent pipeline program, we also can hand them to you. We can
Connect that,
identify them and we can,
dots.
and so we've been able to connect the dots here and everybody wins. And so today we have our graduation ceremony for our first inaugural graduating class. I am just so privileged to be surrounded by people like Braxton Davis, who, I mean, he's constantly saying thank you to me for supporting his program and his nonprofit, but I just can't tell him enough. Like, I am inspired every day by people like him, right? Didn't have a lot of resource. And he saw this problem that seemed too big and complex for everybody else. And he said, I have to do something and I'm going to do what it takes. And the sacrifice, I can't even tell you, nights, weekends, years to build that nonprofit, create that world-class training because he's laid that foundation. His dream, this dream of creating equity in our profession is a reality. And it's just the first step in, essentially changing the face of our profession forever. So I just could not be more proud and inspired by people like him. And he's not the only one. I have other people on my team who they're doing incredible things. So to answer your question, I am spurred to take action and commitment to doing what I can with my privilege and power because I've been inspired by so many people and I've been challenged. Hannah is one of them, not afraid to give me
She's
that
not.
radical
No.
candor,
Mm-hmm.
right? Hey, you need to be doing more and you're not doing enough. And because she's not afraid to say that, that's really caused me to kind of reflect on how can I do more. And it's something I love.
You highlighted so much just now. The reality and fact that so many people don't really engage with or haven't really considered that for those of us who are from marginalized communities or minoritized ethnicities, it's not necessarily true to assume that the 2 year old or the 8 year old or the 15-year old for that matter recognizes discrimination when it's happening or even has the language to describe and say like this is a manifestation of oppression. So I think that's something that I really want to amplify because I think it's an assumption that too many people have. Like, of course they knew, maybe not, maybe you were just a kid on Saturday riding your bicycle and thought, of all the cleaning that my mom does, that's another thing on her list. It was just as as simple as that, to learn later, oh, there was more to it. So I think that's definitely something I just wanted to amplify. And then really that piece, no matter the industry. So I know in this instance we're talking about, the patent industry and innovation and innovators and such. But it's a common refrain for folks in leadership in different industries to say, well, we want diverse talent, but they don't exist. They're not out there. And you're not the first one to say, who's been a guest on our show, they are out there. They've been out there for years. It's a matter of connecting the dots. Maybe the methodology that's been used to try and seek these people isn't accurate to get to that community. But the people are out there. The talent is out there. Creating the opportunity and the space and drawing those connections is often, that networking is often what's missing, but not the talent.
I think you're absolutely right, Sable. Now, that was something that was kind of eye opening to me, which is yes, the underrepresentation is real, and the numbers of minorities and women in the IP profession is very low,
Yes.
but there are many talented individuals out there. And that was one conversation, late one evening after our class, Design for Inclusion. But one evening, I remember, we finally broke after a full day of instruction. And I stayed back and I said, I need to talk to you, Hannah, about something. And she said, what's going on? I said, I love this class. I'm learning so much. But trying to build diverse teams is something I've been trying to do for a long time now, across over the course of my career. And as I look back at my track record, I haven't been able to do it. And I think in the IP profession, they just don't exist. And without even having studied my profession and the data, I mean, almost immediately her first response was, "You're not trying hard enough." And I said, "Whoa, like, let me explain no, you're not trying hard enough." And I remember that was a conversation that really made me think about, like, how can I rethink the way, the approach, the mentality, and even the methodology I use to hire and recruit people and
Recruit,
recruit
of
talent.
course.
And
Yeah.
I feel like that was the first step in lots of changes in kind of rethinking what is the evaluation criteria, the hiring criteria we use. We know that diverse teams are better, so then why are we not building them? Honestly, we're not really factoring in the value of that cognitive diversity when we try to hire. And so that was one piece of the whole evaluation criteria we use is kind of broken and distorted and based on the status quo that has been pervasive of systems of oppression for so long. So that was kind of one piece. The other one was it was a real opportunity during the pandemic to actually broaden our recruiting net to different parts of the country. So, for me, having been a hiring manager for a long time, I never really recruited talented IP professionals from places like Atlanta
Mhm.
or even DC or other areas
Those
where
are
there
definitely
are
rural
more.
hubs that
Yes.
and with concentrated populations of marginalized communities. But again, if you're not thinking through what schools do we normally go to, what locations do we normally stick to? Well, yeah, that's why you can't find the diverse talent because you're not going to where they
I
are.
mean, what you just said, it sounds so straightforward, and it's almost silly in terms of what actually plays out, right? So in big tech, for instance, like where I live, right in smack dab in Silicon Valley, all big tech firms, like they like to see other big tech firms on people's resumes. So we're all kind of hiring from each other. And this has been an ongoing thing for years. Law firms, they love to see big, prestigious law firms on people's resumes. Oh, they've been at Latham, they've been at Mofo, they like,
Investment
none of those
banking,
firms.
like no matter it is, they want to see
Yes,
the big
investment, no matter
higher
what the industry is.
education. You've been at Harvard, you've been at MIT, except yeah, it's
Oh,
a,
that's like, yeah. I mean, that's the other thing as well, right? Like, I've been at companies where the unsaid rule is we like to see law schools from Ivy Leagues on the resumes. And now, when you actually study it and look at systems of oppression, I mean, I think, with the exception of maybe one Ivy League, all of them are rooted in a history of slavery and racism. And you think that just disappears? Hell no. And so, all these things, there's this whole circle and network and cycle of people trying to hire from these different institutions and schools when in fact none of them have diverse teams. And then all of the leaders in those organizations then say, why can't we build diverse teams? We know they're better. We just can't find the diverse people. It is almost silly, but it's also not. It's also very discouraging,
yeah.
that this is the cycle we're in.
It is definitely a cycle. It's like if it's top 10 always, who makes up the top 10? Who gets into the top 10? How many that get into the top 10 are legacy, even though that's an entirely different conversation. And then you're right, it creates a cycle where it's like, well, everyone's extended network is just a microcosm and replica of everyone else's existing network that is not diverse. And here we are going, we need diverse talent. And it's like, this is a really large country. I promise you they're out there. Okay. They might not be where you've been looking, but they are there.
So a little confession time. Prior to me joining Meta, and keep in mind, like, I've been now practicing since '99. I've been out for a while and a hiring manager for a long time. Prior to me joining Meta, and I've been here for about 4 years now, I had never hired anyone, and I have hired too many people to count. I had never hired anyone from an HBCU. At Meta was the first time I hired someone from HBCU. Now we have multiple team members who have HBCUs on their resumes. What's interesting is I find I have other leaders that I often talk to, and sometimes they'll say, like, it's great, you're hiring people who have these diverse backgrounds, HBCUs. And I'm thinking, our vice president of the United States went to Howard, for God's sake. Like, I shouldn't, there should be no one patting me on the back for looking at HBCUs for talent. It's clear. And so this just, again, it's
And that
almost silly to
assumption.
see how long.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is so, well, one, for those who don't know, who might be listening for the first time, HBCU is a historically black university. Loads of them in the country, just so you know. Won't list them all, but our vice president currently, because this is a podcast, so who knows, you might listen to this in 20 years. But Our current vice president is a graduate of Howard University, which is also one of the top HBCUs. The assumption that if you did not attend top 10, that you're not smart enough, swift enough, and you won't be able to handle the job. I think there's so many things that have to be untangled. But I love the fact that you just said confession. Jeremiah, you were so honest in admitting your failures. And not just like in a one-on-one conversation or even in a group conversation. Like you will admit them publicly, you will share them, on LinkedIn. Like you're very vocal about confessions and failures and where you've messed up. Where does that come from? Because what I find in this space in particular, one, no one wants to make a mistake. Sometimes folks, have very real hesitation with committing to certain things because they don't want to get it wrong, they don't want to say the wrong thing and so forth. But then there's also that layer of when they do mess up, not wanting to admit as a leader they've messed up. And that's, Jeremiah, you lay it all on the table, you lay out all your cards, like, here's what I tried to do, here's what I did, here's where I learned I messed up after the fact, here are my learning lessons, this is what I pledge to moving forward. Where does that come from? Because it's not something we see often.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, it's hard for me to respond without mentioning Brene Brown at all, right? Who is kind of the queen of vulnerability. But I will say, I feel like there's some leaders who look to Brene Brown to kind of understand how to use vulnerability as a tool, and it can be in a very effective tool. For me, I would say the tool part of it and understanding how to use it as a leader, that came after the fact. Like for me, I think in my life, throughout the course of my life, I have just experienced that vulnerability is the first step in reconciliation and growth. And without it, you really can't truly grow. And this is true. This has been true for virtually every aspect of my life, at least the parts of my life that are the most important to me, like the relationship with my wife and with my kids and my family and friends. Like, if I do want to be the best spouse or the best father or the best parent or the best friend I can be, I have to be vulnerable. Like, I need that feedback in order to grow as a person and be a better person to each of them. And I've definitely experienced that again and again. And in many ways now, being at a company like Meta, where, we've got leaders like Sheryl Sandberg, who's got some amazing advice on embracing vulnerability in a way that actually leads to growth and change. I have definitely experienced that in my life. And I almost find like the more painful the experience, the more painful the feedback, the greater opportunity for growth. And so this is why I covet it. I think this is why a lot of the leaders on my team covet it. And we have a culture where everyone is not just asking for feedback, but really trying to create a safe space so that people around you feel comfortable giving you that feedback because they know you genuinely want it. They know you're not going to react defensively. And ultimately, in response to your question, Sable, it's the key to growth as a person. And so for me, that's why I feel like I'm pretty comfortable with my confessions, not only because I want to embrace that growth, but also because I make a lot of mistakes. So I learn by failures. And for me, that's been one of the best ways to grow and continue to improve as a person.
I'm so glad you said the growth piece because sometimes it feels as, and I have not, I'm sure I've read data on this in the past, but not recently, folks. So please don't quote me or ask for numbers and percentages. I do not have it on hand. But it does feel, from like an anecdotal perspective, observation, if you will, that the hesitancy of growth causes folks to stay away from discomfort because most discomfort, like you very much so just mentioned, leads to growth. What that growth might look like, sound like, lead to, we honestly don't know. But it's something that we highlight in many of our programs. Like, recognize that your body is responding to the conversation that's, the dialogue that's taking place right now. What might that be signaling to you? What might that mean? And what happens if you just kind of sit in the discomfort and navigate through it versus trying to avoid it? Because I think about these conversations, like we've been talking about oppression, systems of oppression. We've mentioned racism, but there's so many. There could be Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, disableism. There's so many systems that exist. If we avoid the conversation because we don't want discomfort, How do we get into a place where we can have inclusive spaces and equity? It's not really possible. Like we have to have these conversations, and it's not going to be like a joy over tea and a cocktail, if you will. There will be moments where you're like, oh, this is rough, this is hard, but it's necessary. You mentioned complicit earlier in one of your earlier responses, and I'm thinking about how you're open and vulnerable. Thank you for just shouting out Brene Brown. Loads of work going there, especially what she does with guilt and shame. And then I've already said you're public with like, hey, folks, I messed up. You had a very interesting piece. I really appreciated reading it. I don't know what like the official title is because of the platform, but you were very, very vocal on apathy and excuses, and you know what that meant for you and what you reflected on and recognized within yourself and others, if you will. You might not have read it. I believe this is on LinkedIn. What caused you in particular for that one? Because not many folks are engaging with vulnerability, much less apathy.
Ultimately, what triggered my decision to kind of write that article and share my experience, it actually came from seeing a headline in the news about a recent lawsuit initiated by a number of black coaches against the NFL.
Okay.
And what's interesting about it is there is a rule that's been instituted in the NFL called the Rooney Rule that essentially requires, any open leadership position, coaching position on NFL teams, you have to at least consider or interview a person of color, a marginalized person in that selection process, and that was kind of their initiative to create more diversity in the league and head coaching positions and leadership. It turns out it has not worked, and essentially it's become just a checkbox
It's the checkbox
that many teams.
activity. Yeah.
Yes. And I won't go into the details of that ongoing litigation, but you can read all about it. You can kind of see in the complaint, what those black coaches have experienced and some of the really kind of shocking experiences that they learned around this whole Rooney rule being just a sham. Like they really had no chance at all in getting those positions. It was literally a formality that some teams took. Very quickly, I couldn't help but think about my experience in the legal industry, which is many legal teams that I've been a part of have adopted the Rooney Rule in some form or another and called it a different name. So any open role you have when you're a hiring manager on legal teams, you've got to make sure. And some people would say it's terrific, right? Because literally, all the recruiters will even hold you accountable to say, hey, you need at least one diverse candidate you're considering for this open role. But what I found, and again, I included Hannah. I referenced Hannah in my share. The thing I was realizing was, most of my time spent as a hiring manager, I was following the Rooney Rule, and it wasn't working for me personally. So as I went through my mental checklist of all the different hires and the teams that I've built over the time and over the course of my career, they haven't been very diverse. And that was kind of the big problem and realization that I brought to Hannah to say, I want you to help me because I want to do it. I have all the right intentions, but it's not happening.
Hmm.
And I think what it signaled to me is a couple things. One is I've got lots of friends in the industry and even outside the industry who are hiring managers, and they may not see themselves as people in positions of privilege and power. You are. You are making the decision that literally impacts people's lives because you're deciding who is most deserving
Hmm.
of
Most
employment opportunities,
qualified, whatever terminology.
however you define
Yeah.
that, whatever terminology you use, but you have the decision making power to effectively change someone's life. And so that's number one, which is realizing you've got that power and privilege and you have a responsibility to do the right thing. The second thing I think that I realized was I just didn't know, like a lot of what you were saying before, Sable, around we're getting more and more education around diversity, equity, and inclusion and understanding systems of oppression, but we're not practicing how to create inclusive spaces. We're not practicing how to recruit diverse teams and build them, right? We're talking about the importance of it, but no one's teaching hiring managers like how to do it. And so one example I'll give you is on our team and across Meta, like we're very committed to building a diverse workforce, and we've got some great company broadcasted goals that we put out there that I think are all terrific. But at the hiring manager level, it's really hard because we don't have any training for how to do this. And so one of the things that we now do on my team that's been really useful is sometimes I refer to it as a gap analysis,
Mm,
right? So we've got this table, this matrix of every team member in my group,
hmm
and it just kind of just lays out their educational background, their work experience, their skills, different things about their perspectives and backgrounds to kind of very quickly display to different team members. Like we started doing that, and over the course of the last few years, I mean, it has been a remarkable change. I mean, the way we evaluate candidates and the way we try to optimize for building a team that has maximum cognitive diversity, if you will. I mean, today we have, close to 70% of our team are BIPOC. My senior leaders, I have four of them.
hmm
Two are female, two are male. They are all people of color. I have never, looking back at my career, I have never been a part of a team that's so diverse. And the other part of it, Sable, that's just incredible to me is every day I experience the value of that diversity.
hmm
I mean, the kinds of ideas and opinions and robust debate and discussion we have about projects and goals we're working on, I've never experienced that level of cognitive diversity. And in fact, this is why I go around saying, like, I would put our team against any team in a competition. I mean, this is the most impressive team that I've ever been a part of. And people out there, if you were on my teams before, don't be offended by this because I'm not saying like you're not smart, you're not talented. It's the combination of the group we have maximized and we're looking to optimize for that cognitive diversity, and it ends up in a more effective organization across the board, and that is clear. So a little bit on, I think, the journey I've been on, the change that I've been through, and hopefully some hiring managers out there who hear this will kind of take this to heart and really kind of take a hard look at how are you doing, what is your track record. And if you believe all the research that out there, and there's a lot of it now that shows that diverse teams are just simply better, and you want a more effective and a better team for your organization, hey, are you doing everything that you're doing that you should be doing? And that was essentially the process that I went through.
I appreciate the disclaimer for your past teams. I'm convinced they'll appreciate that. I'm also convinced your current team will appreciate what you just shared as well. I love the specifics that you've highlighted in terms of like what are you doing to actually go from dialogue to action and execution in terms of diverse teams. And as you were saying that, something that came to mind, and we talked about this. It might have been episode 3 or 4 with Abella, who also used to be at Meta before the name change. We talked about retention because oftentimes, Jeremiah, I'm not sure if you've heard this. You had to have heard this because of how long you've been a hiring manager. But oftentimes, pushback will be, well, we hired that diverse candidate, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and they didn't stay very long. Considering hiring is a costly investment for an organization, it's not a free. Some people think it's free. It's not free, folks. For anyone that doesn't know that, there's money that's involved, but that's not the point. A lot of times, because that one diverse candidate, or maybe they had five but they never stayed more than 18 months or what have you, they're like, I don't want to invest in another diverse candidate because they don't stay long, versus going, well, what is happening internally that you're not able to retain the diverse candidates and talent that you do recruit. So I love this highlighting of the recruitment piece because that's definitely an important piece of the puzzle. And I always want to add in, and then retention. What is happening internally, the systems, the processes, the practices, etc., that often cause people to go, this is not for me. I'm uncomfortable here. I'm dissatisfied here. I'm experiencing discrimination here, and that's why I'm leaving. You don't have to speak to the retention route if you don't want to at all, but it was just something I went, don't forget this, folks. And once you get them, what are we doing so we're not losing them?
I think it's an absolutely great point. I'd love to comment on it, which is it's interesting. I feel like there's been such a focus on hiring diverse people and building diverse workforces. But again, it kind of goes to what I just mentioned around not really being prepared for what happens when you do that. Right. And so even what I just mentioned, Sable, around this is the most diverse team I've ever been on. I don't want anyone to be under a misimpression that it's now like we're done and open the champagne bottle and like we're celebrating every day that we have this great diverse team. No, it's hard work. Now we have this diverse team. What are we going to do with it? How do we leverage the great cognitive diversity we have? And how do we make sure that people feel, especially people from historically marginalized communities, feel like they can be their authentic selves?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's so many people of color that I talk to and listen to their experience at law firms and corporations. They have to be a different person. They feel like, and the example I've often been given is they put me in a box. And so they're happy to have me at this firm because now I add to their diversity numbers, but I can't really be my authentic self. And what I have found as a leader, as a manager, is when you have an employee or a direct report that can't be their authentic self, that doesn't bring their authentic self to work, it's almost like you've tied their hands behind their back and you've said, give me your best. You're never going to be able to unlock their potential. You're never going to see the rich creativity, the innovation, and the skills and excellence they might bring if they're forced to not bring their full selves to work. So you got to create that safe space. So it's something we constantly work on. And I think to your point before, Sable, like the way we work on it is we practice.
Mm-hmm.
How are we having these conversations? If there are microaggressions, how do we raise our hand and say, hey, what just happened there?
Mm-hmm.
There's sometimes, because we don't have all the training, we're still kind of like rolling out a lot of this training at Meta. And even with our group, I would say it's still very much under resourced. That sometimes what we've said, it's almost like a rule I've said to my leads and my team members is if you're in a team meeting and you're feeling a microaggression, but let's say you don't know what to say, you don't know how to raise your hand, you don't want to cause a big problem. I said, our safe word is ouch. Raise your hand and say
Love
ouch.
a safe
And
word.
at least that will stop, that will pause the meeting to say, what just happened? Someone said something that made me feel less than. Someone said something that made me feel like not good. We don't want to be like that. We want to actually learn from each other. And fortunately, I have a team that's filled with individuals who all have their hearts in the right places. They all want to do the right thing. They don't want anyone to feel bad. They don't want to offend people, but we need to teach each other. We need to learn. And so a lot of it is that practice, that safe word, the training sessions, the reading circles, and all these kinds of things that we can do to practice talking about, systems of oppression, experiences we have, and how we feel. We've got to be able to do that to create that safe space so people feel like they belong. And I will say, I mean, something that just happened last night. We had a team building event. We went to dinner afterwards, and one of the attorneys of color on my team said to me, he hasn't been on the team that long, only for a few months. He said this is the first time in his career he feels like he's at home. And I had to hold back the
I was gonna
tears because
say
I was
I
so
would have
happy. I mean,
broken down at that moment. The tears would have.
and this is an accomplished attorney who's been at many law firms, other in-house. It's like he's been at other
Yeah, he's
organizations, and
not
now
a
like this
one
is the only
L. He's
one.
been around.
He's been put in a box his whole career, and now at Meta, I can't even tell you, the things he's able to do, the way he's able to shine because he feels that safe
Yeah,
space. It's
hands are no longer
incredible.
tied. Using your analogy, yeah.
Yep, that's right. That's right.
You highlighted so much, and one thing that's just like coming to my mind is the idea of psychological safety and on all sides. So for those who might be in a position of power and privilege, for those who might be from a marginalized community or minoritized ethnicity, the reality is no matter where you are on the spectrum, no matter what system might be under investigation at that moment, the idea is that we're human beings and we are going to make mistakes, period. But we are especially going to make mistakes doing this work. As you mentioned, it's like everything, no matter the organization, it's not getting the amount of resource it really needs to like super, super speed turbocharge change. Resource is often there, but when we realize these are historical things that have been around for hundreds of years, the amount of resource it takes to dismantle and untangle is quite high. That said, I love this use of a safe word like ouch. So if for our team, that's our word. What did it take to get folks into a space where they realize mistakes are inevitable? We know your intention is pure, but we also want to focus more on the impact versus our intention because harm is it's going to happen. Mistakes are inevitable. How have you gotten them to like reckon with this reality, but also lean into being in a room or a virtual room and going, ouch? Like Sable's comfortable enough to raise her hand as the black woman and go, ouch. Like, what did that require? What did you have to do? Because it's a beautiful thing, but I know that wasn't necessarily easy, and there was intentionality behind that.
I will say this is one of the benefits that I have being at a company that is truly committed to creating a safe space, an inclusive space for everyone. And there are programs company wide that I think have kind of laid the foundation for people to be talking about this, and not even just the safe space to talk about it, encouraging people like we need to talk about this. One of the programs that I love is a program called the Microphone Report. That's essentially an anonymous hotline where people can report microaggressions and other experiences of discrimination they might have felt, and it's all anonymized and shared with the company. So my team and I, and even my department, will actually go through and read about these experiences people have reported to make sure we're understanding, like, are these things that we could see ourselves doing? Are there issues that we should be talking about? And we try to implement it and make it useful and practical by saying, let's walk through some of these reported incidents and make sure that we're up to speed, that we're practicing talking about these things so they're not super awkward and people don't feel like they can't raise these things. That has definitely been helpful. A number of the different programs like that throughout the company that have made it easier to talk about these kinds of issues. The other thing I would say for my team specifically is one thing that's helped a lot is a framework that was given to me by another mentor of mine. His name is Reggie Butler. He's a coach, and one of his specialties is coaching on inclusive leadership. And one of the things he said to me is, he said, Jeremiah, now that you feel like you've built like a truly diverse team, now the hard work
Yeah.
begins. How do
That's
you
actually the
create an
easy part.
inclusive culture?
Yeah. Creating the team.
That's the easy
Actually the
part.
easy part.
You've got talented, diverse people on your team. Like, how do you make sure you retain them and they feel comfortable and they feel like they can be their authentic selves? One of the frameworks he gave me that I really like, I've been using it quite a bit, is called comfort zone radius, CZR.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, it is a pie with four quadrants. And the four quadrants are my lived experience, your lived experience, subject matter expertise, and relationship depth.
Mm.
I've actually brought this back to my team to say, hey, we all can see on any Zoom call, at any meeting we attend, we've got a lot of diversity on this team, right? And everyone on my team, they love it. But I said, now the hard work begins. And if we want to make sure that we can actually lean in to that diversity and really leverage it and create that inclusive space, we actually have to be doing the work on the back end. And so, what do I mean by that? I think about a number of empathy sessions that my department had during the Black Lives Matter movement, where we just got together and we just shared, how are people feeling? And one thing I heard again and again, especially from my colleagues and friends who are Black, they would often say, like, I'm so tired. I have so many non-Black, friends and colleagues reaching out to me saying, "What can I do? I'm so sorry for you." And many of them, I heard this from several Black friends of mine. They would all say the same thing, which is like, "I'm tired. Just like do the
Yeah.
work. I can't." And so for a few of them, I would say, "What do you mean by that? I like it, but what do you mean by that?" And they're like, it's basically like, I want you to be learning on your
Yeah.
own so that when you bring it to me, I don't have the burden of educating you on all these issues, my lived experience, Black people's lived experience, subject matter knowledge. And so one thing Reggie told me that really resonated with, I think, a lot of people on my team is, don't go around just asking these questions and you haven't done any work on your own. If we want to embrace this diversity and create this inclusive culture, make sure you're doing the work on your own. And so I will say, Sable, like, it's been really beneficial for my team because occasionally someone will raise a question on, Sable, what is it like to be a Black woman and experience whatever, some
Yeah.
bad thing?
Mm-hmm.
And some of it, I like, I cringe a little bit to
Those
say,
are
oh,
cringe worthy.
like, I really don't want Sable to have to relive this. It's probably painful. And to be honest, like, really, you don't know about this? And I will tell you, like, this still happens, but there's so much grace on the team because on the back end, they are reading books, they are listening to podcasts. And the other thing that's really important, they are investing in relationship depth. So if someone on my team asks you that question, Sable, like, I could be pretty sure nowadays that you have a pretty strong relationship with
Where
that
you're even
person. So you
go
have,
there if you want to. Yeah.
yes, you're comfortable going there, and you're going to pause to say, you know what? I'm not crazy about reliving this. I'm not crazy about explaining again. But for this person, I'm going to do
I
it
will.
because they're my friend.
Yeah. It's different.
It goes a long
It's
way. And so,
not transactional.
absolutely. And so, I think those four areas are really important for any organization that's trying to build that safe space. Make sure that each and every person is doing the work on the back end. So when you come together, you've got that extra grace, you've got that extra flexibility to be able to lean in and practice so that if you mess up, it's going to be okay. There's some extra grace there because they all know you've been working on your own.
I mean, you said so much. I love the use of the word grace because Tarana Burke, which spoke at you all's leadership day in 2018, spoke to, grace meets grace and what that means in relationship with each other as we're doing this work. Like this work requires grace, but you highlighted such an important piece that, relationship matters and where can we remove the burden? I'm thinking about, all of the violence because we've been talking about Black Lives Matter since the murder of George Floyd, as if he were the only one murdered that year, or the first one, for that matter. But when you think about all of the violence that has also impacted the Asian community as a whole, so and of course, when folks say Asians, like who are you talking about? Like, folks, this could be Vietnamese, Japanese, Korean, Chinese, like Malaysian, whatever specific community within that. It's like I should not go to you and go, and how do you feel? It's like, what can I do? Yeah, I might be from a marginalized community, but Google is free. The podcasts are free. What can I do as a Black woman to read up and figure out things? And then if we have that rapport, we have that relationship, the conversation goes so very differently than when that none of that is there.
You are so right. And I've seen it and I've experienced it when two people come to the table and one of the people has not done the
Yeah.
work. It's just not a great
No,
recipe, right?
it is
Because
a
there's not really that genuine desire to build that empathy. It almost feels
yeah.
disingenuous. It's like, tell me about this. I want to learn.
Mhm.
If you really wanted to learn, you'd be doing some of the
You would
work.
have started already. I don't expect you to be capstone level at the university, but you would have
Yes,
tinkered in introductory material at a minimum. I cannot believe an
absolutely.
hour has passed. I must ask you this last question. I could have 1,000 more if I'm honest, but I must ask you this last question before we leave. I've asked everyone if you could have dinner, a meal, breakfast, lunch, whatever tickles your fancy, with a person in the equity space, past or present. You cannot say Hannah for the record. I'm throwing that in there. But because that is easy to do. But if you could have a meal with anyone, past or president, in the equity space, who would that be? Or who would that be? One person, two people, whatever.
First, I will say, if anyone listening to this is wondering, I am not getting paid by Fearless Futures
No,
here.
I
So when
swear, he
I know I've mentioned Hannah quite a bit here, honestly, she's changed my life. And so I just want to, I'm first going to say that she won't be my person because you
yeah.
said I can't choose her, but she's been incredible, an incredible mentor to me, and has been so gracious with her time, extra time, even outside of my class with her. I don't know, right off the top, I would probably say Sable. I mean, there's so many that I'm thinking about right now. Um, Brian Stevenson is just the story is so incredible, and in many ways, I mentioned before Braxton Davis on my team. It's just there are certain individuals who are I feel are just they're so inspirational and exceptional because they see a problem, and many of us see a problem. Right? We see these problems of systemic oppression. We see systemic inequality. We can talk about it all day how bad it is, but there's some people who look at it and they say, I'm going to go do something. And one of the things that Brian Stevenson said during one talk that I saw was that, so many people now talking these days around diversity, and diverse teams are so much better. And it's all, it's such a happy thing that, people are all involved in this movement. But he said, in order to achieve true equity, a sacrifice must be made.
Mm,
And I feel like that's the part of the story that people don't really want to hear. Like we're all willing to do something, say words, do whatever is performative as long as it doesn't cost us
yeah.
anything.
What's the
And
cost
I see
to
this
doing real
I see
equity?
this I see this again and again, and I see this even with many of my API friends out there. And I'm all about supporting the API community. I love it. I have so many API friends out there who are all, very much aligned with me on diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. But then when it gets to affirmative action or, trying to include more marginalized communities at certain universities or schools, and it might quote unquote, take a spot away from their child, all of a sudden, I don't support that. That doesn't seem fair. So it's interesting how when it hits home, when now there's a sacrifice that needs to be made, even though we all know the right thing is that most of the institutions, the educational institutions in our country are broken and they need way more diversity. If that impacts my family or my kids, all of a sudden Not sure I'm in it. I'm not sure I'm all in it for that. So I think that's a really important part of the message that I think Brian has mentioned, and people like Braxton Davis on my team and also Brian, like they just live it. You know what I mean? They see the problem, they live it. Brian Stevenson went to Harvard. He could go anywhere and do anything with his talent and background, but instead he fights for the defenseless. People can't afford criminal defense lawyers who are wrongly charged for crimes and held in prison, and it's incredible every day for people like that. I am truly inspired, and I'm fortunate to be surrounded by people even on my own team who inspire me every day. So I'm going to say Brian Stevenson and Braxton Davis and other people on my team. I can have dinner with them anytime I want, and I'm going to. So I don't need to say them. I'm going to pick Brian.
Fair enough. Jeremiah, thank you so much for your time and your energy. It was a pleasure. I know an hour is like the longest you want to go in the podcast world before people stop listening. But do know, if this were not a podcast, I would just keep talking to you until we absolutely had to do other things because we're adults with responsibilities. But again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your energy. I've enjoyed our conversation so much.
I love talking to you, Sable. Thank you so much.